All right, welcome back, everyone. So I wanted to show this game because it was one of the best attacking games I've ever played. It is a online blitz game that I played against one of my friends, and in this game I had the white pieces. I started off with the move d4, and opponent responded d5, and here I decided to play e4. This is the Black Redeemer Gambit. Not a super sound opening in the grand scheme of things, but this is just a blitz game, of course, and I wanted a nice and attacking game, so I decided to play this. So, of course, d takes d4 is the best move, accepting the Gambit. And the logic of this opening is that white will play knight c3 and just go for quick queenside development and then aim to castle queenside. So my opponent continued bishop f5. Here I played pawn to f3. This is one of the main ideas of the gambit, such that if pawn takes f3 happens, you can either take with the queen or the knight, and get your pieces out really quickly that way. So my opponent decided to take. I took with the knight, and now my opponent played knight f6. Very normal developing move. And black is, of course, slightly better in this position. The valuation is about like minus zero point 0.4 here, because after all, black is up a pawn, but white has the compensation in the form of having slightly better central control with this pawn in the center and having a little bit of open lines and development. So here I decided to continue with the move bishop c4. My original intention was actually to castle short, but as you'll see in the next couple of moves, what I ended up doing was castling queenside. So my opponent continued with e6, very normal move, and here I just developed my other bishop to d5, to g5. So now I've got all of my pieces out. Now my opponent continued knight c6, pressuring my pawn on d4, and here I played queen d2. The computer labels some of these moves as inaccurate because here apparently it wanted me to play the move d5, just like forcing open the center right away, which is a pretty good move, d5, and after something like e takes d5, I take with the knight, and white is already actually equalized here because after moves like short castles, you've got ideas of playing like rook e1 check, and there's a lot of threats on black's king in the center, and this bishop on g5 is doing a really nice job pinning the knight on f6. But I played the move queen d2, and of course the attacking chess has not arrived yet. I still obviously have to finish my development in castle. So we get bishop b7, very normal developing move, and now I castle queenside, and this is where the kind of fun starts. So one of the best moves for black here is to castle short, and if black had castled short here, nothing in this game would have probably ever happened. Black is just cleanly better after short castles, and here I would have had to go for some play in the center with like rook h to e1 and pawn to d5, and just try and use the fact that I have really nice development, and for the cost of a pawn, I just open up all of the lines and go for some attack like this in the center. But instead of short castles, my opponent played the move knight d5, and this is also a pretty decent move. Establishing the knight in the center, blockading my pawn on d4 so that there's never any d5 business, and there's always a idea of trading off these bishops, because the more pieces that black trades off, the easier it will be to navigate this position up a pawn and convert the advantage. So here in this position, I decided to play the move bishop takes d5, and the rationale behind this move is if I play something like knight takes d5, I wanted to essentially open up the position by forcing him to play e takes d5. But the issue is my bishop is under attack in this position because the pawn has landed on d5. And now I have to spend an extra move moving my bishop to a safe square, and that will give him time to trade these bishops off. And so I didn't want to get too many pieces off the board, because eventually I wanted to bring a rook to the e-file and have this pressure on that bishop on e7. So allowing him to get this trade in time would have been pretty bad for me. So instead of knight d5, I played the better move, which is bishop takes d5. And after e takes d5, here I just played rook to e1. Now, the best move here for black is probably to play pawn to f6, because you have to get rid of this pressure somehow. But my opponent instead played bishop to e6, very human move, of course, because of course the drawback of f6 is it kind of weakens your king once you short castle. In this case, because I don't have a light squared bishop and there's no pressure on this diagonal, it's actually completely fine for black. But bishop e6 is also a very reasonable move. And from here on out in this position, I proceeded to play all of the top Stockfish engine moves and execute a flawless attack. Truly in the spirit of Mikhail Tal. So, of course, one of the things I need to address is this tension between the two bishops. Now, if I move this bishop back, just a very slow kind of move, that will give my opponent time to castle. And after black castles, I will basically have no more threats, and the game will essentially be only really in black's favor. So here, the move bishop takes e7 is relatively forced. I have to play a move that's forcing and doesn't let black castle. Now, my opponent takes with a knight. Very reasonable move, because taking with the queen, of course, kind of subjects yourself to this pin, and taking with the knight also allows you to play c6 on the next move and go for a more solidified structure on the queen side. And here I continue with the forcing moves because, again, I cannot let black castle. So here I continued with the move knight g5. And if you want to play along and kind of guess the moves as I go, feel free to do so, because this is also going to be a really good exercise at playing with the initiative. So knight g5, of course, creates another threat because I would like to take the bishop on e6, f takes e6, and then rook takes e6. And if my opponent allows me to do this, then I would have just cleanly equalized because, for instance, if my opponent castles, I'll just take the bishop, I'll get my rook here, and this is pretty nice for white. And even though the position is equal, white has a lot of play in this position. I've recovered my pawn deficit. This pawn on d5 will always be a target. And the move queen to g5 is also a threat because I would be attacking the knight on e7, I'd be attacking the pawn on d5. I can also double the rooks on the e-file, and there's just a bunch of attacking ideas for white. So after knight g5, my opponent played queen to d6. Very logical move as well, trying to reinforce the bishop on e6, because after knight takes and pawn takes, of course, black is very safe here. Black can even castle queenside if they want to, and black should be having no problems here. But instead what I did was I continued playing with the initiative. And here I played the move knight b5. And after I played the move knight b5, I saw something pretty crazy. My opponent played queen b6 in this position. And what I saw in this position was I was wondering, how do I open up this e-file toward the king? Because on the next move, again, black is threatening to castle, whether it be castling long or castling short. And once black castles, black is going to be completely safe. So that's when I saw this incredible move, rook takes e6, sacrificing the rook. And what is the idea of this? Well, if my knight is taken on b5, then I'm simply going to move right back. And now what I've done is, because I've chopped off this bishop, the e-file is obviously open, and black cannot castle because this knight is under significant pressure. And on the next move, I'm going to double the rooks by playing rook d to e1, and then this knight will eventually be lost. And so I'm just clearly better here. But obviously the most critical line is what happens if my opponent takes the rook. And this is where I saw a really cool tactical pattern, knight takes e6. Second brilliant move. And the really crazy thing about this position is this knight is stopping black from castling. The knight controls the d8 and f8 squares, so black cannot castle either way. And the knights are attacking the c7 square, so I'm threatening knight takes c7 and knight takes a8, which would be a fork. And both of these knights, despite them being hanging, are untouchable. If queen takes b5, then I have knight takes c7 check, which is a fork of the queen, rook, and king. And if the queen takes the knight on e6, then I have knight takes c7 check again, which is a fork of the queen, rook, and king. So really, really cool tactical pattern here. And here my opponent found the best move, which is king d7, because you have to escape this fork somehow. Now, it is extremely important to be precise. If I take this pawn on c7, the issue is that my knights end up becoming kind of stuck, because if I move one knight, the other will be hanging. And so my opponent can quickly just play rook a c8 here, sack the rook for the two knights, and then just cleanly be up 2 points of material. So what's the catch here? Why is white still having the initiative? Well, the critical move is that I can give a check with my knight, knight c5 check, and now my opponent plays king c6. And this is kind of, the most challenging response, because even though the computer likes a move like king c8 better, this lets white kind of escape, because white will simply just consolidate, use the open lines, and black will just have a hard time developing, because eventually with this king on c8, the rook on a8 will have a hard time getting out. And in my opinion, that's an easier advantage for white to prove. But after the move king c6, white has to find the correct way to win here, because for one, the knight on b5 is hanging, and if black is able to get their rooks into the game, then white will not have that big of an advantage. So here in this position, I played rook to e1. And I saw something pretty crazy here. So if black takes the knight on b5 with the queen, then rook to e6 is a mate in one. This is very nice checkmate. The knight and rook work together super nicely to control the rank and the escape square on d7. And if the king takes the knight on b5, then I have the move a4 check. If the king goes back to c6, then I've got mate on e6 with the rook again, because the pawn controls the escape square with b5. And if the king comes to c4, then I have queen c3 mate, with the king not being able to go anywhere as the queen is, attacking the king, and the b5 square is controlled by the pawn. And of course the d4 pawn is also defended. So rook to e1 is a nice move, temporarily sacrificing this knight, but no matter how the knight is taken, it will lead to a forced checkmate. I'm also threatening rook e6, which would win the opponent's queen, and I'm also attacking the knight on e7. So how does my opponent continue? They play knight f5, which is the best move. And the logic is that after rook to e6, they can block with knight to d6. So where is the win here for white? Well, it took a lot of calculation, but the best move in the position is pawn to c4, using every single resource that white has, including the pawns in front of the king. And the really nice part about c4 is that it defends the knight on b5, and it forces open the position by causing some pawn tension between the c4 pawn and pawn on d5. Note that the knight cannot take on c4, which would be pretty bad for white if that were possible, because the rook pins the knight to the king. Now, if I played any other move here that doesn't really defend this knight on b5, let's say, I don't know, some move like queen c3, then black is very easily consolidating here after queen takes b5. Because note that I don't really have a great discovery with my knight here, as the queen will always be able to block any checks from my queen on c4. And so this would be a terrible mistake, queen takes c3. So I rightfully find this move c4, and after pawn takes c4, I find the move which forces a checkmating attack, which is pawn to a4. And you might be asking, why can't I play the move a4 first? And while this move is still better for white, the move c4 is more precise, because you, after d takes c4 and a4, you always have the threat of d5 on the cards. And d5 is actually a very big threat for white, as you will see, because after my opponent plays rook a to e8, I have a very nice checkmate here. If you'd like to pause the video and try and find the checkmate, feel free to do so. But it starts with the move pawn to d5 check, king takes c5, now pawn to b4 check, and the king has no more squares, so en passant is forced, and queen to d4 checkmate. And this was the conclusion of the massive attack that my army went on, at the end of the game, my king is just left without any defense surrounding it. But I'd used every single resource that I had in the position, except for these two pawns on the king side to go for this attack. So very, very nice and tactical game. Some other lines that are interesting that I was calculating during the game was, let's say, my opponent plays like rook f8 here, for instance. Then I have the same mate, obviously, and it's very difficult to stop. And the only other thing that my opponent can do is give up the queen. So queen takes b5 or queen takes c5 are really the only moves that don't lead to mate. And queen a5, which might give the escape square on b6 for the king, is still going to be a forced mate in 3, because after this I can simply go queen a6 and then queen b7 mate, which is also very cool. So just to show this is a very nice mate, because the knight on d6 is pinned by the rook. And even though the knight on c5 is hanging and the queen on c5 is quote-unquote hanging because of the knight attacking it, there is nothing that black can do. But ultimately, the game ended with this move d5 check, which is basically unstoppable, and this really cool mate after b4, forcing en passant and queen d4. So yeah, that was the conclusion of the game. I hope you guys enjoyed that really nice attacking game. I certainly did, and yeah, I hope that was helpful and instructive. I'll see you guys later.